I have this book in here. Let's make sure I can find it. Is it still in here? I have this book in here. When I was on the street one day, I wrote a plan. It's in this little book I found. It's part of some things I wrote. I didn't lose this book. Among many things were the business plan, other things. And one of the things it had in here was a plan I had for how to deal with veterans housing and how to deal with a concept of preparing for what might be a situation of having to address a mature adult relationship with other countries in the world, including Russia. And one of the things I said is that my plan identified a matter in which I believed, and it says right here, it says this right here, decrease military spending by 2/3 in 5 years. I added policy. Now, my understanding is legally that there are currently preclusions on decreasing departmental budgets beyond a certain amount per year. So as things currently stand, it is not constitutional to decrease the budget for the Department of Defense or other areas that would be under military spending by 2/3 in 5 years. But there is a means by which to engage a graduated process for an annual reduction in spending that focuses on a qualitative as opposed to quantitative assessment of military needs that could significantly reduce the proportion of the American obligation that is characterized and classified under the military. Part of that has to deal with a form of political education, including economic education that provides the material conditions for people in the United States to take greater ownership of the means of their own production and hence responsibility. Part of that has to do with a significant revision to our concept of what is an acceptable tax policy. And another part of it has to deal with reining in our completely unacceptably unaccountable processes connected to speculation on contract bidding as well as derivatives, including derivatives that are used in the gas and oil sector or other energy areas, other areas of the energy sector that are also themselves a result of flawed policy around wealth or health and wellness that allow for a misrepresentation that we have a greater demand for medical need than we actually do. Now, the primary manner in which this could be effectively implemented is through a reconsideration of what the primary material foundation for various kinds of security investments in our security instruments that are used in investment in our country have as their priority, i.e. real estate. Real estate, not just in terms of the material land and the fixed structures on top of that real estate, but also considerations of financing related to fixed assets or public works in various localities and regions as a kind of priority in terms of assessing the value and also determining what's considered to be value-added components of local communities that would then be allowed to factor into a consideration of participation on a state or federal level. My old blog, the one that got stolen, there was some information that's actually very hard to come by, especially these days. The public sources have been recapitulated, and the kinds of places you would go to be able to provide primary source information are hard to come by. There's actually not as much of this particular information as I would like in the books I have access to that have the primary source documents concerning the history of banking and finance in the United States. But one of the things it discussed this blog post I had, was that prior to the Great Depression, there was a very novel situation going on with non centrally urbanized banking paradigms. That we were in a situation within the country where we were going to have to determine what was going to be the material basis for our money. It was no longer feasible to try to peg things to the gold standard or the silver standard in the same way. This concept that a particular weight in gold or silver would translate into a particular kind of value that could be reflected in certain kinds of paper circulation. There was other considerations that were going on, and one of the things it talked about is the concept of almost local commodity-based banking, that different areas that were decentralized from the concentrated urban enclave would have their own concepts of what would be the primary commodity, or the primary actual tangible asset base for determining what would be considered money. Now, the power to coin money and emit bills of credit is with the federal government. But if we're determining what would be considered to be a standard by which we value and create valuation for local communities as a way to kind of back up the circulation of currency within their communities, there's definitely room and precedent within American history specifically for doing so. There's been a lot of concern and contention that part of what happened was that the Great Depression was actually a result of people that had a specific one world agenda that wanted to do what they could to create the means by which to centralize decision making when it came to an understanding of what was accepted as currency and how it was to be made accessible, as well as how the value regarding it was to be defined, not only domestically but also in terms of what would be considered a corollary exchange with foreign markets. If you read some of the primary source documents themselves, including some of the testimony that was held before Congress by the people identified as the intellectual authors, and or read the recountings, you see that there is a more debate that happened at the time than we have been allowed to be apprised of in our general education. As a matter of fact, some of the people that I understand, some of the people that were the primary authors of what we understand to be the foundation today of the central banking system, did not agree with how other people wanted to use it. This is very explicit. They say this. They even said it before Congress. But nonetheless, we are where we are. And one of the things that's been allowed to happen is that there has been a refusal to present to the public information about how these processes work at the level that they work at. It's not acceptable to say that your population is not capable of understanding the nuances of the system so that they can participate. It's just not acceptable. I contend that if you have a social structure or you define yourself to have a particular jurisdictional influence or command, then you should not be allowed to extend it beyond the parameters of that which you believe you can actually provide specifically for the material foundations for being able to self-govern. If your people and you cannot engage in processes of self-determination based on an understanding of the processes at work so that you can take responsibility, then you don't need that jurisdiction. And if we've got people that think that they're part of some elite class and that the entire rest of the world needs to be centralized under them, then why aren't they letting us know what the processes are so that we can take responsibility for our role? You don't get to say, 250 years down the road? The case of Texas, 160 years down the road, you want to make it confidential? You don't get to say that. If that's the case, you need to cede. You need to relinquish your concept of what it means to be in a governing position. You don't get to 150 years down the road say, well, what used to be public information is now only going to be made accessible to a select group of people within our state, especially when that select group of people within your state is on another level taking steps to allow themselves to be pulled in with a select group of people within at least two other states, as the State Bar of Texas did via commission from the Judiciary of Texas when they were determining the qualifications for the bar exam for membership as a member of the bar in Texas. You don't get to do that. You've overstepped your capacity to actually be responsible with what you've tried to promote as your authority. Now, if we're dealing with that on a federal level, then we need to address it as such. Period. Nobody in the world has the right to say that they're going to be able to create some global umbrella organization that could centrally plan the policy of countries as disparate as the ones we have just here in North America, much less the entire rest of the world. And it's not even necessary. There are plenty of very practical, meaningful, specific, legitimate manners that these can be addressed otherwise. If you created some sort of proprietary business technology when you went to Africa to offer up entrepreneur models after beta testing it under executive order for 2 years, and you don't want people to know, too fucking bad. On another level, we already know. We don't approve. There's plenty of other things we can do instead. Again, please understand, I've been trying for 3 years to formally petition regarding the lack of follow-through of people that self-determined or self-declared themselves as qualified to represent the rest of the people in my country on a federal level. There's a lot that you haven't done that was very simple to do. Please step down. Please stand down. And stop trying to ram this disgusting retirement scheme failure down the throat of the rest of America. I'm 43 years old. I have no pension. I have no retirement. But I still have 25 years that I could work to get it. I'm not letting you take the next 25 years of my life for a bankrupt scheme to prop up criminals. It's just not going to happen. In the meantime, I'm letting you know directly, there's all kinds of other things that should be happening you haven't done, and it appears you have no intention to do. So just step down.